Great, thank you, Brian. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Tom Lushai, and I am the chair of the Adult Education Committee at CPC, and along with Elaine Walker, Brad Starr, Brian, and Dwayne Bidwell. We all constitute the Adult Education Committee. So this is part 2 in our Advent in the Arts series. Part 1 was featured Jerry DeMasi with the organ a couple weeks ago, which was fantastic. And this is the second of 2 parts. So this evening we will have 2 guests. Alan Jack will be telling us about his creations known as Wild Things on Wood and show some of his metal and wood designs. And he has a PowerPoint presentation prepared for us. And Jack Caselles, known for his Cactus Jack ceramics, will show images of some of the ceramic pieces he's done, as well as the inspirations for his art. And we'll also see the new communion set commissioned by CPC that Jack just gave us. And so what we will do this evening, we'll start with, I'll read a little biographical information about Alan Jack, and then he will present, and then he'll go for about half an hour, and then we'll switch to Jack Caselles. So let me start by introducing briefly Alan Jack. His business card reads Wild Things on Wood and all handmade metal and wood designs. He's been a member of CPC for about 30 years, and most of that time he's been a member of the choir as a tenor. His training is in biology, and he also has additional X-ray training. He's CPR certified. His professional career included managing a radiology department at Pomona Valley Community Hospital, and over 35 years as a cardiac sales specialist and workforce supervisor. He's been very involved in volunteer work in the community, including for CPC, designing and building the Little Free Library. He worked as a volunteer for the Claremont Police Department and currently for the Pomona Valley Hospital as a shuttle driver. He's worked as volunteered as a substitute tutor at CLASP. He's been a training instructor for community emergency response team. And he will be working with the city of Claremont to refurbish the Little Free Library in Wheeler Park. His metal art, which he'll be talking about, he's created 77 pieces today, and all the art he creates, he gives away, and some is given to nonprofits who hold auctions. So I will now go ahead and ask Alan to share his PowerPoint presentation with us, and then talk us through some of his art and his inspiration, after which we'll have a chance to ask questions.
Okay. Brian, or Tom, I think I need your help here.
Sure. Are you looking to pull up your PowerPoint?
Yes.
Let's see, I'm not sure.
Yes, so Alan, go ahead and stop your screen share and then open your PowerPoint and restart your screen share.
Okay, how do I go to full screen again? There we go. Yeah. So stop my screen share.
We've already done that. So now open your PowerPoint presentation and then restart your screen share.
Well, I have to exit full screen then, right? Correct?
Yeah.
All right, and here's the PowerPoint. Let me bring that up. Does everyone see it?
Not yet, Pop. You have to hit share screen. If you go down to the bottom, it'll be green.
Well, I've done something wrong.
Okay, do you have your PowerPoint open, Pop?
Yeah, that's my daughter, everyone.
Okay, Dad, go ahead now. If your PowerPoint is open, go down to the bottom of your bar of your screen, and you're going to see in green, share screen.
Okay.
You're going to click on that.
And now go over
click share screen, and then you can activate your PowerPoint from there.
Okay.
I think we're getting it now.
Are we getting there?
We see a coyote howling at the moon.
Yes.
There you go. All right, let me bring that up. And Tom, let me move everybody over to here. Does that work?
We can see, yes, we can see the coyote. We can
Thank
see
you, Karen.
Yes. Thank you, Karen.
Let me slide this over just a bit. Okay. This was my wife's idea back in 2010. And we had gone on a weekend trip up to Los Olivos area up near Santa Barbara. We went to an outdoor nursery that featured a lot of metal art. And she said, you know, you're retired now, you're kind of bored. Why don't you try some metal art? And this is what happened. I came home, and that is a full-sized coyote, and this one has a red nose on it because of the time of year. But it was Beverly's idea, and that got me started on 77 pieces. Now, I'm going to move through these slides fairly quickly to give equal time to Mr. Caselles. This is my mother in 1950 in what was the dining area of our house. If you're familiar with Acacia Chocolatier, these eggs here would be are just as good as anything that See's Candy would make. The short story is my dad and mother wanted to start a private candy shop after he got out of the Army in the Second World War. They had great skills. They both went to classes, and they didn't have a good business plan, and they didn't have enough money. So she started making these for the little ones, for family, and then the neighbors heard about it, and she was one of 5 ladies who was a executive secretary for then Howard Hughes. And this is before the days of electric typewriters. She was super good at stenography. She was one of the lead stenographers. She would make 300 to 400 of these eggs every Easter. I would put a bunch of them in a Red Ryder wagon and pull them around El Segundo and give them to friends after the family. Here's my mom about 15 to 20 years later, Joan Jack. Her other passion was making miniatures. She made this entire house out of a kit, entered it into a national convention in, I believe, Kansas City, and won an award for it. So to answer Jerry Damasi's question, what makes you become an artist? My mother. That's the simple answer. This is chocolate bunnies for the family. She would hand decorate these. My dad would pour the chocolate into a mold. Then moving on to how I got started in working with 1/8 of an inch sheet metal. Here is my very crude workstation, but it really works. It's a piece of plywood on a couple of sawhorses. This is about a 15-inch by 15-inch, 1/8 of an inch piece of metal. So what I do, this is P22 over at Griffith Park. And I took this off the internet. I then made a template out of thick plastic. I put the template here, used a Sharpie and traced it. And down here, I use a drill press and I put holes in this because you're not going to see. Can you all see the pointer there? And you can all hear me? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
You're not going to see those because they're going to be buried in the final wood. And this is the saw I use. I bought it over at Lowe's. It's a Bosch. Nothing special, but it has a special set of blades that will cut 1/8 of an inch metal. Here is a finished product. This is called the Big 5. we went to Africa with Linda and Lowell Rice. They have an organization called Pathways Africa. In 2008, we actually saw all these animals, not all at once, but they call it the Big Five because if it's an elephant, a rhino, a Cape buffalo, a lion, and a leopard, and you are a big game hunter, you have to go out on foot with one guide and one rifle, and it's either you or the animal. And I don't identify with that, but so I made this and gave it to the man who took us on safari. I shipped it to him after we got home as a thank you. And this is an acacia tree, which the elephants use as a food source by shaking the tree and all the nuts fall on the ground. To give you some idea of the size, this is 22 inches long, it's 1 inch thick, and this is the 4th hardest wood in the world. This is zebra wood, only found in Africa. Here is a bobcat, which currently is over at Cal BG, the Botanic Gardens, in Lucinda McDade's office until the COVID restrictions permit them to put it out for silent auction. And this will benefit their PhD program at the gardens. This is a total gift. And this is solid metal, 3.5 feet long, 1/8 of an inch thick, welded in 2 places and powder coated. If you're familiar with that, it's like a finish on a fine automobile. You cannot put a fingerprint on it. Here's an auction item for the Children's Fund, and an eagle snatching a salmon out of a river. The only thing that's holding this on, and this is fairly heavy, probably 5 pounds. There's a tab of metal that goes down into this 2-inch piece of walnut, that's black walnut. And that takes at least 2 weeks all by itself to make. Here's an auction item I gave to Jan Creasy for clasp, and little squirrel sitting on a sycamore branch, again, on the African wood, and there's some acorns on the floor. And here's the favorite animal of Dr. Kim Breniger. And Kim and Bill hosted us for a long time in Upland on Wednesday nights when the quartet from the choir would rehearse. And Kim, God bless you, she gave us cookies every time we came over there, coffee, tea, milk, whatever. And I don't usually hand paint, but that's a solid piece of 1/8 of an inch metal on a sycamore branch and on black walnut. And the black walnut piece here, what? Don't use, no, use your, oh, don't use the arrow. Okay, I'm being told not to use the arrow. Okay, here's a gift to Jan Creasy, and I made this for her 4 months before she announced she was going to retire, simply to thank her for how everything she did for children in CLASP and how gracious and kind she was to Beverly and I as tutors. So here's an elephant walking. The interesting thing about this, when you see it in real life in Africa, the baby snatches onto the mother's tail with its trunk, because when they go across the river, the baby will drown if it doesn't float up to the surface of the water. And you have to see that to believe it, but this is the way they will forge a river together. So this is a piece that is anchored into the wood, as I mentioned earlier. Here's the piece I just gave to Karen Rosenthal, the president of the Heritage Organization, to the city of Claremont. Here's the derivation of the first little library. One day, 3 years ago, Beverly said, 3 years ago, why don't you make a little library out in front of our house? And all of this is put together with wood that I had at the time in the garage, scrap wood. And frankly, it kind of looks that way, but the kids and the people on our street here really love it. This next slide was a walk I took with Pastor Karen Sapio, and Karen gave me some real good idea on what the color scheme should be on the little library, which we donated to the church, and gave me some background on the doves and the significance of them to our religion. This is the little library and what I call dry fitting. I put this together and took it apart 5 times. You will not see any nail holes, only the screw heads on the brass. And the reason for that is I wanted to recess them and sand them, so particularly children wouldn't cut their fingers when they touched the item. So I had to put it together 4 or 5 times to get the door to open and close. I did it in sections the first time and it didn't open very well. So I cut the door out of one piece of wood and then cut the holes in it for the plexiglass to go in it. And here it is in finished form, painted as close as I could to match the colors of the church on the morning that we delivered it. And when I say we, I do mean Beverly and myself. We made this together. I did all the work. She approved the budget. So that's a team. And here is the one side. There is a dove descending from heaven to earth, symbolic of the Holy Spirit returning to earth after Christ's baptism. And again, you will not find, when you look at it closely, you will not find any screw holes or nail holes. There's 6 screws in there, 1 inch long, and then they've been sanded over. This is where Karen Sapio decided, and I wanted her to decide where to put this. If you all recognize where this is, outside the classroom. And the children come from the playground and when they walk by, you'll see the bottom shelf doesn't have any books in it yet. This was the very first day we put it there. And it's about 30% larger than the upper one. So it'll take puzzles and children's books. When asked to sign it, I prefer not to do that. If you look on the back, you will see November 2021. So when any of the parishioners say, well, where'd this come from? And they say, well, it was given to the church as a gift, November of 2021. The next generation of art in our family is my son and our granddaughter. And our son worked his way through college at Santa Cruz at a place called Annie Glass. And he ended up doing etched glass, and the plates that you see, the fine dinnerware, are hand painted in 24 karat gold or platinum. And our son was taught how to make these. And Oprah Winfrey really put her on the map because she bought thousands and thousands of dollars worth of stuff from Annie. But that got our son through college. Our granddaughter Ivy is now 27 years young, and she's employed as a character designer at Nickelodeon and Warner Brothers. This is an example on the left of our son's glass art. We are fortunate to have both of these pieces in our house, and he sandblasted that in freehand into that glass and then put it in these mounts, if you will, and then he did the hummingbird. And this is our granddaughter's art, the Warner Brothers. That was her first professional piece that won her a job there. And then the piece to the right is either Warner Brothers or Nickelodeon. And her name is Ivy Jordan. And we're back to the first slide. So that took me 20 minutes. I'm going to open it up for question and answer.
Great. Thank you so much, Alan. That's really inspirational and really generous of you for sharing your artwork with so many in the community. I just have one question and then we'll open it up to the rest of the group. As I understand, but correct me if I'm wrong, you started this work post-retirement. You hadn't done any of this art before you retired?
That is correct. I have a moderate case of ADHD. Last year I read 4 books that were over 400 pages, and that's a record for me. I would rather do something with my hands, and my family knows this. But it's something that I think I got from my mother, because she never, ever said to me as I grow older, you know, be a giver, not a taker. And I learned by watching her. She gave everything she made away. And so when I had the time and stopped traveling nationally, I started painting. I didn't like that. I started a couple other things. I didn't like that. And then Beverly, I credit Beverly with saying, why don't you try something in metal? And the neat thing about what I do is, if all these pieces I showed you, if I made you another one, and I made Dr. Kim Brediger another one, it would look the same, but it would not be identical because they're all handmade. So if I do a piece for an organization or a person, it's truly unique. And that's what I like about it, as opposed to using a plasma cutter, which anybody that can draw with their finger like this can use a plasma cutter. This is old school the way I do it. So does that answer your question, Tom?
It does, and it gives me hope that there's a future beyond reading dissertations for me, because that's how I spend most of my time. But it's good to know I might have some artistic inspiration once that part of my career is over. But thank you so much, Alan, and let's see if anyone else has questions. I'm sure there will be some more questions.
Any other questions?
Keep it simple.
If you have a question, feel free to shout it out, or just raise your hand, or raise your virtual hand through Zoom.
Actually, I just want to make a quick comment that in addition to all the work that Alan does with the choir and with his artistic abilities with metal, those of you that may or may not know that when we had the organ refurbished about 5 years ago, Alan also crafted the current organ mirror that is on top of the console. And so we used it so that I'd be able to see the director directing before. Now I primarily use it so I can see where the pastors are during the course of the service and get an idea of how long I need to keep playing or whatever. So it's very useful. He did a magnificent job on it. So I just wanted to give a shout out to Alan for what he did for the choir, for the music program also.
Thank you, Jerry. I wouldn't feel good if I didn't mention how important our daughter Karen and the work she does with autistic children is. That's her form of art, if you will. And my wife, who is special ed at Claremont High School, and has motivated me to do stuff like this. Any other questions? Because I want to save time for Mr. Caselles.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that I didn't share this with purpose. I didn't share it with you, but I wanted to say in this group that the Little Free Library at the church was such a gift, but a gift of opportunity. And so Pastor Karen and I talked a little bit about, this could be a way to really not just engage class students, but the multiple different children's groups that come across Angel Courtyard and the Fellowship Hall. And one thing that we did immediately, Alan, was that I started asking people and putting it out in my weekly email to get Advent or Christmas story books that we could add to it. And so we got several donations, and we had been adding Advent stories and Christmas stories so that kids could have, a Christmas kind of feel during the season.
Well, that's the win-win about that type of a gift. There's going to be adults and children, mainly children, that and Beverly and Karen will never meet, that are going to walk away with the book they've been looking for. And that to me is what the whole project was, the motivation to do it. I'm just so glad that it's been received the way it's been received. Any other questions? Because I want to save time, Brian, for Mr. Caselles.
Jack, Alan, you take as much time as you want, okay?
Jack, I just want to thank you so much for giving us your history of how your mother being so artistic, and it's just really nice to hear how this all developed. So thank you.
Yeah, well, you're quite welcome. I like to make things and fix things, and occasionally I'll read a book, but that's not where I go to. Look at my daughter.
Well, thank you so much, Alan. It's
thank you. Thanks.
Really an inspiration.
Again, thank the committee for inviting me.
Oh yes. Well, I will, and again, thank you for your generosity and for your inspiration.
You're welcome. I'll mute myself out and listen to the other presenter.
Great. So our next presenter is here, Jack. I hope I'm presenting your last name correctly, Caselles?
Caselles, perfect.
Okay, great. Well, it's great to meet you, Jack. So I'll give a short introduction, and then we'll ask you to talk a little bit about your work. So Jack's business is known as Cactus Jack Ceramics. He creates individual pieces as well as small batches of mugs and bowls. His work has been displayed by the Pomona Valley Art Association. He's been a member of CPC for I'm not sure how long.
30, 40 years.
30, 40 years, okay. He is a graduate of Azusa Pacific University and Claremont Graduate University, where I am currently employed. He was a high school teacher in Azusa for 36 years, where he taught social studies and psychology and was the varsity football coach for 10 years. He was active in teacher advocacy and served in leadership positions for both the National Education Association and the California Teachers Association. And the subject of his dissertation was teacher leadership. He also spent some years as an engineer at Rocketdyne. He began his ceramic work much as Alan began his work in retirement. Jack began his work in retirement. His wife Vera had invited him to accompany her to a jewelry class. And he saw the ceramic lab, and I guess that's where it all started. He began this artwork in 2002. And in his most recent work for CBC is the communion set that I think we've seen in Sanctuary over the last couple of weeks. And that includes a chalice, a bread plate, and a wine vessel. So I will pass the microphone to you, Jack, to see if you want to talk a little bit about that creation or any of your other creations. And I believe that you're going to share some photos with us, or maybe Brian will be sharing the photos.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, let me just say thank you and welcome to everybody. Thanks for tuning in. This is a great honor to be asked to present to the congregation on behalf of the church. Where to start? I think probably just going straight to the piece that you've seen up on the altar. I was asked to do a commission to do a communion set. And before I start talking about that, I'd like to talk to you about where that came from. I don't know who in the church decided to do that, but I was in my regular evening prayer, okay, and talking to God as I usually do about what to do with the rest of my life. I don't want to be one of those persons that sits around watching Netflix and YouTube, so I want to be something more than that. I want to be able to do things that honor our Lord and to give to people. Anyway, that's kind of embarrassing to say in front of everybody, but that's where I was. And about 10 minutes after I said that, now I shouldn't say 10 minutes, but certainly within a couple of days, I had a visit from Pastor Brian, who asked me to be part of another committee. And then right after that, asked for a commission to do a communion set. I had done a communion set for my son, who's also a pastor, and I had been looking at the communion set on our altar for years. And I keep thinking every time I looked at that communion set, how awkward that must be to lift the pitcher and pour it into a small goblet. Well, the pitchers usually have long handles, and I, as a potter, know that if you lift something that heavy with a small, fine-looking pitcher handle, then eventually it's just going to break off. And I could just see, Pastor Karen or Pastor Brian standing there with wine all over themselves. So I decided to do a more, I won't say traditional, more, old-fashioned is probably the better word. What I did was I found a design for a pitcher and goblet that goes back hundreds of years, if not more. And it does not have a pitcher handle. It has a small amount of wine in it, and it has also a lid, so that you can take it with you. It's kind of portable. So I started making those, and you can't see by this picture what the colors are. On another picture, you can see the colors are blue, white, black, and red. The reason for those colors is that the blue represents heaven. I thought that would be perfect for the top of that pitcher and goblet. And then the white stands for purity, for God's purity and Christ's sacrifice. The black stands for the crucifix. It's rather stylized, and then it's hard to see, but there are droplets of blood or red across the front of both those items. It was a pleasure to make, easily done. I don't know, Brian, can you click on this, the hands that did it over here? Can you show that? There we go. That was me beginning to pull that one up. And anyway, there's a couple of other pictures there. Brian, I'll let you just go to them as you wish. In addition to these, I had an earlier commission to do a, can you see this? This is a set of crosses, crucifixes. Brian, can they see this?
No, they can only see what I'm showing.
Oh, okay. Well, all right.
I can stop sharing.
I don't know how you do that.
I did it. There you go.
There we go. These were, I believe, to be gifts that Karen was going to give to, and that's up to her to give, but that you can see the cross, and you can see the blue here stands for purity, sacrifice, and of course the cross that we stylize on our church doors, same kind of the dove. The dove. Anyway, that was another commission, and while I have your attention there, let me show you something else. My mother kind of had an artistic bent that I don't think affected me at all, except through her influence. She was an artist for Gladding McBean. You may recognize this pattern. Okay, this is called a rose pattern. Many of you have had it in your home or have this in your home. She was the artist who did them all. Art does not necessarily run in our family. My father was a hard worker. The only other artist in my family is my cousin, who does watercolor. Anyway, let's talk about how I got into this. I was fully academic, going to school. All I thought about was numbers and arrange colors and do design maybe just as a part of the job. I took drafting in high school, which kind of led me in a direction I never thought I was going to go. I intended to be an Air Force pilot. Okay, if you saw my size today, you'd know that was never going to happen. But that's what I intended to do. I went to college after high school, played football, and got injured. And so I had to sit out a year and went to work in the aerospace industry, wound up taking my drafting skills, if you call it that, and went to work for North American Aviation for the NASA program, building the Saturn V rockets. And I don't know what they had in mind, but they gave me the title of engineer. And so I worked for about 5 years for Rocketdyne as an engineer and was responsible for chemistry lab on one side and the atomics lab on the other side. It was an interesting job, a lot of different inventions at that time, and found out for the first time that ceramics plays a big part in everything. As a matter of fact, the reason we have rockets today is because of the discovery that porcelain will not melt at high temperatures, and you can use them as the Venturi tube in a rocket. Way more information you probably wanted to know, but here we are. Anyway, I worked there for a while, and kind of like out of the blue, a man came in and sat on my desk and said, "Boy, understand you want to play football." And of course, my ears went up and everything else, and I had a chance to try out, received a full scholarship to go back to college and finish out my bachelor's degree. I majored in psychology, thinking I would become a counselor. I had a professor doctor in Glendale who wanted an assistant. I was going to go to work for him, which I did for a while, and I had my own practice. All the time we did that, there was no interest in art whatsoever. It was all numbers, straight ahead, arrows one way or the other. No circles in my life. Just jump ahead a long way. I was about to retire. I'd been teaching for 30 some years, and I had come to the top of my profession. I was very well respected in my profession, both nationally and statewide and locally, and had I'd have to run meetings for CTA with 1,000 people at a time. Was the chair of my own committee on legislation. While working on a PhD, I decided after 2 tries to get that thing through that that was just not my thing. I'd be much better off using my time to actually be active in the work of teacher advocacy and not theoretic. So I went back in there. Anyway, long story longer, I was about to retire. I retired in 2002. At the same time, my mother died, my best friend died, and I was a mess. And so my wife says, "Why don't you come out to this little place where I do my hobby?" She was doing jewelry making. So I went out there. I wasn't interested in jewelry whatsoever, but right next door they had a ceramics lab. So I sat down, started playing around in the mud. It was terrible. I have a cup that I keep around just for my own laughs that is a good 1 inch thick on the sides. I tried to give one to my mother one time. She grabbed it with both hands, looked at me and smiled and said, "Well, hon, the next one will be better." Well, the next one was a little better anyway. But anyway, I started working there. I took classes from some great teachers, which is always the secret, to becoming good at what you're doing, is find out what other folks are doing. So I took classes all over the country, workshops, week here, week there, a month here, a month there. I did a month up in Sierra Nevada in the university up there. And so by and large, it kind of became my passion. I tell people that if you cut my veins, you don't get blood that comes out, you get red slip. Okay, it's really part of me. I do it every day. When I didn't have a studio here, I would have to travel, miles and miles to go to a studio where they had a wheel and a kill. I went every day. I spent a full month just learning how to do handles on cups. Okay, I must have done 50 handles just to learn how to do that. I have been in studios. I've been in galleries. I've been fortunate enough to be given some prizes and things like that, and that's nice. But mainly what I do now is I make enough pieces I sell a few, I give a lot away. I like to donate to different causes. so that they can do fundraisers and things like that. And of course, I love doing things for the church. I sell a few pieces around here. I was just lately in the Claremont, what is it called? The Art Walk downtown, the Saturday Art Walk. And that was fun. I hope I get to do that again. I get to meet a lot of nice people. I've been in the Village Venture almost every year for the at least last 10 years, maybe more. And so anyway, I sell a few pieces, just enough to buy clay so that I can get my clay fix. I don't know what would happen. If I didn't get clay for a while, I'd probably just shrivel up and die. Anyway, I don't know what else to talk to you about. So why don't somebody ask me a question?
Sure. I have a couple questions I'd like to ask, and then I'm sure others would like to ask questions.
Great.
So my first question is, have you had the opportunity to take anyone under your wing to teach them, to mentor them? I'm sure there are lots of people who are interested in learning from you. I wonder if you've been able to pass down some of the lessons you've learned.
I have had personal students. As you mentioned, I have one student that I work with who's now in the same studio that I'm in. We work across the aisle from one another. It's kind of fun to see him doing well. I've been teaching senior citizens for quite a number of years. I started off over in Azusa Unified in the adult school, but then I guess the state stopped funding adult school, and I went to Parks and Recreation. And since then, I've taught over at the Manor. You know, they have a program for some of their seniors. They're just as cute as can be. Frankly, some of those senior citizens are younger than I am, but they do great work. You know, we do slabs and hand building and pinch pots, and the only thing we don't do is wheel throwing. And I love to teach. I tell people that all the time. You know, it's my other passion. I love to teach. You know, you can tell I'm a storyteller when I'm not so nervous. I go on and on and on, and I love to teach. So if anybody wants to know anything at all about clay or anything else in the world, I have an opinion on everything. So yeah.
Well, at another time, I'd like to learn more about education and teacher leadership from you, but for now, we'll stick to the topic at hand. And my second question is, well, first, I feel like ceramics and pottery is something that would be very therapeutic during stressful times like these. And I'm sure there are lots of people who would be interested to engage in that kind of work. But
be careful with that, because when I started on the wheel, you have to concentrate so hard that I would go to bed at night, and I would see this wheel on the ceiling going round and round and round and round. It got to the point where I could make it stop and make it go the other way.
Sort of like counting sheep, I guess, just making the wheel spin. So my other question is whether you feel like you've been more or less or the same in terms of productivity and inspiration during the pandemic. I mean, it seems like a perfect time to really go to your studio and spend a lot of time. Just curious. Actually, I had the same question for Alan.
I didn't have a studio before the pandemic. Before the pandemic, I would go to a studio, for example, in Ontario or Baldwin Park, and work there with colleagues. But when the pandemic struck, it was obvious that we had to sequester. And so at the same time, Vera and I had gone down to get our taxes done. And the tax guy says, you know what, you need a write-off, blah, blah, blah. And he said, why don't you start up a business around ceramics? So he got me a small business loan. I was able to buy a kiln, to buy a wheel, and to buy a slab roller and some equipment, you know, some stuff like that, and set up a studio in my garage. And I have shelves and stuff. We took part of the house and made it into a showroom. And the garage is the studio, and bought a shed for the outside to keep all of the extra, you know what, out there. So it's different. It's much different now. I do go to the studio once in a while, but not even near as much as I used to before.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jack. I'm sure that others have questions. We've got about 10 more minutes, so Does anyone want to ask Jack a question?
Jack,
I have a question.
this is Dwight, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Jack, this is Chuck. How do the two parts of your life, your activist part, where you were really good at that, and your artistic part come together? Do they help one another, or do you do one as a relief from the other? Just talk about that duality.
Chuck, at the end of my career, there were a lot of strings that I still had back into teacher advocacy. You know, people wanting articles written, comments made to basically, I was the poster child for retirement, and I'd go around and do speaking engagements to people who were retiring from districts. But gradually and eventually, that just kind of disappeared. I do talk to a few people nowadays. You know, what's the ex-president of LA Unified, Wayne Johnson? Wayne Johnson.
Right.
You know Wayne, don't you?
I know Wayne, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we talk once in a while, and that's about it. But it seemed to me like I needed something different. You know better than anybody else on this planet what it was like for me to walk away from doing the theoretical work that we were doing. Okay. But when I did that, I had something else to walk into. And then after that, I could walk into something else. So I do pottery. I am part of the ceramic art world. I am known wherever I go. And whenever I walk into a state or a building and somebody's doing pottery or has something up on the wall, you know, I can walk up there and we're suddenly friends. I was over at the garden today thinking of you. And we looked in the showroom, and there's a whole rack of stuff from Crispin, yeah, Gonzalez. And I know him. I knew him when he and I put stuff together in the same booth and went to shows together. And so I'm instantly part of another world. So yeah, there was a gradual diminishing and then an expanding of another world.
Great question, Chuck. Thank you. Delight, did you have a question?
I noticed that as you were talking about the cross that you did and the communion serving elements, that you were very thoughtful in the choice of colors and reflecting your faith. How does your pottery and your ceramics add value to your life at this point in your life with your spirituality and your art?
Well, it's a bonus. I consider it to be a plus, unexpected delight. Somehow you go from the silent world of prayer. And when you ask, the Lord gives you things. And suddenly I am presented with challenges that bring joy to my heart, that fill me. And then when I start to make them, it's like there's inspiration that comes to me. I mean, anybody can make a bowl. Anybody can make a chalice. Okay? There are 100 people out probably in Claremont today that could make the same things that we have on the altar. I keep telling people that if you fall down, if you're taking a walk and you fall down in Claremont, you will fall into a pottery studio. So that part's not hard. What's hard, or what's interesting, is when you're working at it, you can see things. Suddenly it comes out of the end of my fingers, and I can say, okay, this needs to be symbolic. I need to have some symbol of what the communion is about. Okay, why do we have communion? Okay, we take the blood and we build a new covenant with it. We take the bread and we share our bodies, in the sacrifice of believing. And so all of that had to be shown. As far as I'm concerned, it had to be there. And so that's where what had happened. And, you know, it's just there. I didn't sit down and 2 weeks before and paint these things out and say, this is what I'm going to put on it. It didn't, no, that happened right there when I was doing the glazing.
Great. Any other questions? No questions?
Just to say thank you to both Alan and Jack.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you both. Thank you both for the gifts you've shared with us, for the inspiration you've shared. And Brian, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I too wanted to give my thanks, and you know, this is part 2, so really the 3 that offered their gifts and their artistry were Jerry, Alan, and Jack. You know, and I kind of teased with the phrase of what is it, artisans or artists in the pews. And you know, this was I think that this was a beautiful connection to make during Advent, as part of our waiting and preparation is preparing to receive God's creativity and creation incarnate in the life that we have, the experience that we have, and that creativity flows through each of us. And so I just thought that was beautiful to have these 3 fine folks share the creativity that is divinely inspired, that comes through them as a gift to all of us and to themselves. And so it's just been such fun and a pleasure to be part of what I affectionately call myself as the administrative assistant to all of you. And so being able to help try to coordinate and get things done to make sure that many could hear from you has just been a great joy during this season especially.
Yeah, and I just have 2 reflections that I'd like to share before we close. And one is just that we're so lucky, CPC is so lucky to have such talented and generous members to share their inspiration with us and their art with us to help us enrich our worship. And second, it inspires me to know that there's a possibility for me after retirement to discover some latent skills and passion that I may not even recognize I have right now. And like I said, I hope that in my retirement, I won't be reading dissertations, but I will be doing something that inspires me and maybe that I can share with others like we have this evening.
Retirement counselor.
So I don't know if there are any final concluding remarks.
Jack has something to say.
Oh, Jack. Sorry.
Yeah, I just want to point out 2 things. One is serious and one isn't. I believe that there is an artist in every single person. Every person out there, those that say, oh, I have no art, I can't do that. Sure, there is art in you. It just needs to be brought out. Either you need to look for it or you need a mentor, but everyone has art in them, no matter what. Whether you're working in metal or glass or clay, or if you're just writing, not just writing, but if you're writing, you know, poetry, drawing, there's art somewhere in you. You know, that doodle that you did back in as junior high school can become art. I tell you, I see it on the walls all the time. Okay. The second part is, if anybody needs retirement counseling, call me. Okay. Believe me, I understand what that's like to retire and what to do, everything. Call me. Thank you, everybody, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to everyone. And Jack, I'll be in touch in about 10 years. All right, thank you, everyone. It was great seeing you all, and especially and another thank you to Alan, Jack, and Jack Caselles for
Thank you.
joining us this evening. Good night, everyone.